Hi, everybody. It's Ryan from Pi Records, and I'm here with the fine lads from the Aquamarines. How are you guys?
Good to see you. Good to see you, Ryan. Good to see you, Dave.
Good to see you, Ryan.
Awesome.
We're good. We're good. I'm broadcasting here as you may know from our one of our undisclosed location bases, which are located throughout the world in undisclosed secret locations. And from here is where we plan our impetus of spreading music, harmony, and love throughout the world. That is our mission.
Awesome. Awesome. So, to start things off, could you introduce yourselves each, starting with Dave, and tell us what instruments you play?
Well, I'm Big Wave Dave. I play bass, Fender P bass in the Aquamarines, and been a member of the band since about 2005. I have a very, very long history in the surf scene in the Bay Area, and I've played bass in many different bands in the Bay Area, multiple genres. But I've more or less stayed active in the surf rock scene since the early to mid '90s, where I started my own band, the Tube Sharks, and joined the Aquamarines in roughly 2004, 2005, and been with them ever since, and love it. Great. And I've had other bands since then. I've played with the Twang Tens, and most recently I played with Brodaddy.
Excuse me.
And Brodaddy most recently in the 2010s. And now I'm retired, so I'm up in Reno, Nevada, but I still consider myself a Bay Area kind of guy, and we'll come down and visit the Bay Area scene, Russ and the gang, and make music.
Awesome. And Russell?
Right. So the Aquamarines is something that I envisioned a long time ago. What do I play? I play a lot of stringed instruments, guitar, steel guitar, lap steel, a little bit of pedal steel, a little bit of bass, but not like Dave plays bass, actually. The list goes on: baritone guitar, a little bit of vocals as well. The Aquamarines was kind of my brainchild in a way. Let me just sort of tell you briefly how it got started. I don't know how brief this is going to be. It's kind of a long story, but I'll try to keep it brief. We, as Dave pointed out, we live here in the Bay Area, and the Bay Area had a pretty interesting, strong, local, very, very talented array of instrumental rock bands, and many of them, would be considered instrumental surf rock, certainly. My wife and I often would go down to the beach chalet, excuse me, here in San Francisco. The beach chalet located kind of close to where the Cliff House was or is. It's still sort of in this kind of state of transition from one owner to the next. It's also a historical state location, site, that is. Just as the beach chalet is. But the beach chalet was interesting, I think from a wide variety of reasons. This great local crowd, certainly fine food and drink, local brewery, all that. It's just a great place to hang out, get crab cakes, get craft beer. And on top of that, often on the weekends, to listen to some great bands. And some of those great bands that are right here playing in our neighborhood were guys like Jim Thomas from the Mermen, who had a little combo with some of the other Mermen people. Sometimes Jennifer Burns would be playing on bass. That's the current bass player with the Mermen. Sometimes it would be Johnny Hamilton, who actually sat in for the Aquamarines while we were looking for a bass player, and finally found Dave. Johnny Hamilton's also a great bass player, and then Shigemi Komiyama, who unfortunately is no longer with us, but Shig was an amazing drummer, a big fan of the Shadows, a big fan of instrumental surf music. I believe he played drums on some recordings in Japan for the Plastic Ono band. I think Foghat. I think a few others as well. And he had his own band who also played at the Beach Chalet. The Shy Tones was the one that I was thinking about. Jim Thomas, Jennifer Burns, and Shig on drums. And then he also had his own little combo that he would do down there as well, which I would occasionally sit in on. Moving forward, they're also the Aqua Velvets, founded by Miles Corbin. So, that's just one location, right? We had such a rich musical scene, here in the Bay Area. And in the meantime, my guitar had pretty much been sitting in the closet. And then one day, I don't know if you remember Tower Records.
Yeah.
Do you guys remember Tower Records? Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a great place, right? You could go in there and just browse through such a wide variety of music from around the world. And they even had these little listening stations. If you remember those, you put the headphones on at these little listening stations.
Yep.
And dial up, some of the whatever program they had going on that week. And they would be promoting some bands maybe you've never heard of. And some of the bands I'd never heard of, when I walked in there one day in the early 2000s, a couple of them really caught my ear, and they moved me. And kind of growing up in the 60s and 70s, when I say growing up, I was still just a little kid, but still, that kind of music, that instrumental music, surf music, that wonderful melodic music from the 60s was pretty prevalent. And when I heard what I heard one day, it kind of brought back that same sort of lively, little bit raw, youthful, feeling that I had listening to those amazing melodies and amazing craftsmen playing these instruments. And one of the bands was the Blue Hawaiians, and I'm now very good friends with some of the folks from the Blue Hawaiians. Certainly Gary Brandon, who plays steel guitar and has been just such a selfless mentor to me on steel guitar. You have no idea. He's got so much patience for my just horrible stuff that I did early on. But anyway, him as well. I could go on about the Blue Hawaiians, and I can do that a little bit later. But beautiful stuff that's been, maybe if some of these bands were still around from the 60s today or the 50s, that's probably what they might sound like today. Yeah. And another one of the bands was Low Straitjackets. And Low Straitjackets, obviously inspired a lot of instrumental bands. I saw your interview with Eddie Angel the other day, and it reminded me to include Low Straitjackets. Actually, I probably didn't need any reminding, because I think early on the repertoire from the early Aquamarines, when we first started out, was at least 50% Low Straitjackets. It was, we were like the Low Straitjackets wannabes for sure in a lot of ways. But I just love their music. All the kinds of songs that Eddie was talking about, like Casbah, and I could go on and on. Fury is another one. A couple of Danny Amos's songs as well. But super huge inspiration for us starting early on. And then, we started finding out about, hey, there are like 100 other bands out there that are kind of doing what we're doing. And so we were equally inspired by other bands besides, like some of the ones I mentioned, like the Aqua Velvets, the Mermen. I think we covered Krill Slippin', Lonely Road by the Mermen. We covered so many from so many different bands. I could go on forever. If I could spend an hour just listing the number of bands and the songs that they play, but that's how we got started originally. I hope that wasn't too long-winded. I can keep going. Believe me, there's plenty more to talk about.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
So give me the reason or inspiration that you chose the Aquamarines visually, the visuals.
Right. So there's a legend behind the Aquamarines. And, early on, I mentioned our secret locations, our secret bases, and it was inspired by a group of former commandos, former paratroopers, former Marines, and naval officers and heroes who had left their militaries and many years ago formed a pact, not unlike the Masons, not unlike some other secret societies, where they would, stealthily and secretly from their undisclosed locations, do things good in the world, to make the world a better place, to make it safe for democracy, to make it safe for harmony, to make it safe for love and peace and togetherness. All the good things that make the world good. So not unlike the Beatles when they donned the Sergeant Pepper's uniforms, we found their treasure trove of secret society uniforms, some of which have been long decommissioned, like the ones we're wearing now, which were actually authentic, real former Soviet Union paratrooper uniforms, right? They're no longer used, and what we like about them the most is they're aqua colored.
Ah, nice.
Yeah.
So, Dave, tell me a little bit about what inspires you to play bass. Like who sticks out in your mind as a great surf player, or from any other genre?
That's a good question, because I play in many different genres, but let's just talk about surf rock. Sam Bollet is my idol on rock bass, on punk bass, on surf bass. And of course, Sam played with Dick Dale for many years in the later years. And he's clearly by far my idol on bass. If I would be anybody in the surf rock world, it would be Sam Bollet. That's really where my inspiration comes from.
I didn't know that, Dave.
That's okay, Russ.
You never shared that with me. You never told me about that. But what a great guy, Sam is, and of course, and of course Dusty as well. The drummer used to play with Dick Dale when he was still around, and Slacktone. Both Sam and he were playing with Dave Wronski in that trio.
Yeah, exactly. I also admire Jeff Turner on bass with Pollo Del Mar, who's another San Francisco camaraderie surf rock band with Ferenc DeBrogni. You're probably familiar with Ferenc and with Frankie and the Pool Boys, his bands. Jeff Turner's an excellent bass player. He's played excellent in all of Pollo's work. And that's pretty much it. And then I play in the blues and jazz scene and other types of things. I played with a band called Len Cat many years in the blues and rock community. And, I've enjoyed doing that as well. But that's what got me going on the bass. What's interesting from my career is in the world of surf rock, I've been with the community since maybe the early 90s, even prior to the rise of the bands from the third wave in the Pulp Fiction era. And what happened prior to this, you may or may not know this, but Bob Daly, who was the Surf Raiders from Utah, he had put out I'm giving you the history, the lineage of the community. He had put out a newsletter And people found each other by way of his newsletter when Bob would review any and all modern surf bands, including old bands. And the community centered around that newsletter until the rise of the internet, where everybody had email. And when email arose, everybody found each other on the what's now known as the Cowabunga internet mailing list. So you still didn't have social media, but you had the next best thing, which was live threaded interaction, kind of like what you have with Facebook these days. And that started in the early to mid 90s. And sure enough, in San Francisco, a hotbed of music, you had bands like the Mermen, as Russ mentioned. They were playing in that era, the late 80s, early 90s, sort of reactionary to the grunge scene at the time. The club scene had bands like the Phantom Surfers, the Trash Women, other groups like that. And it was going to happen regardless of the Pulp Fiction phenomenon, which actually was the mainstream gasoline on the fire, as I would say. And at that point, everyone wanted to be in a surf band. The number of bands exploded in the third wave, and all the clubs wanted to have surf rock bands play. So for a period of about 2 or 3 years, it was really, really potent in the scene for brand new bands. And the Bay Area exploded to about, 15, 20 bands at the time. And what also occurred in that period was the legendary DJ Phil Dirt. He had a radio program out of the Bay Area. And what he did is he used the web as a focal point, much like Bob Dally did, to review all of the new bands that were appearing as a result of Pulp Fiction. Well, that list became skyrocketing. He was reviewing bands from all over the world, and every band started to know about it because of the web. And they submitted all their music to Phil, and Phil reviewed it, and that sort of thing. And he became a legendary focus for the third wave by the mantra that he set out to, sort of like what Aquamarines, we're bringing the reverb to the world. And so for the third wave, which probably lasted until the mid-late 2000s, Phil Dirt was a major focus of that period. And I apologize for the lawn mowing noise you might hear back there, but
my dog may bark any second. Don't worry about it.
But Phil Dirt was important to all the Bay Area bands, KFJC Radio, and Phil Dirt was very important to the Aquamarines. And when Phil Dirt finally retired in 2005, the Aquamarines were part of the retirement benefit show at the time, and we feel very proud about that, don't you, Russ?
I mean, it was a marvelous event. I'll let you tell a little more, and then I may add something later. But yeah,
all of the major bands from the Bay Area and some from Southern California and other places played at that show to honor Phil Dirt's retirement. Because Phil was one of the original surf rock DJs that went, decades long in his show, far beyond any of the modern podcasts. So Phil was a major part of the revitalization of surf rock all around the world. And when the web and the internet came about, it just expanded their reach. And so everyone was able to find him, and he became a focal point. And so that's why we honored him in 2005 when he finally left the air. And I would say also by the end of that decade, with the advent of MySpace and Facebook, you have the beginning of what you would call the fourth wave of bands who find out for themselves about how big surf rock had become underneath the radar. And they said, for a second time, this is the fourth wave. Oh my God, there's other bands that love this stuff too. And oh my God, they're sitting here in my own city. So what happens is surf rock is a local phenomenon, but it has worldwide fan base. And so all of the bands play both locally and internationally or globally, you might say, when the opportunity arises. And you know as well as I do that there's, Reverb Brazil and Southern Surf Syndicate, Surf Stomp and Great Lakes Surf Fest.
Surfer Joe's in Italy.
Surfer Joe has the Italian Fest. And, I've always enjoyed going down to Southern California for the
Huntington.
for Huntington Beach, Big Tiki Dude. Yeah. The Surf Guitar 101 festival pretty much on a regular basis. That is what I mean by bands coming into a global and international playing so they can be seen. Otherwise, they end up going back to their own cities. They're going to go back to, Seattle for Surf by Surfwest or whatever it is. And that's how they're going to do their thing on a regular basis. Nobody's going to get overly famous from this, but we love Los Straitjackets. They have done that. We do love them. And, but it's for the love of the music. And of course, it goes back to, Dick Dale Ventures, Shadows, all of that sort of influence as a fundamental. But you take that platform and you expand upon it. You take that as a baseline and you go further. That's what the modern era of bands is typically all about. And that is really what the Aquamarines are all about, and the projects that we have. I'll let Russ take it from here, because I think that's one of the things that we did when we went into the recording studio. What do you think, Russ?
Some really good thoughts there for sure. And I think what you're getting at too is that certainly this is just a lot of fun. The camaraderie that you have among the surf bands, or if you want to call it that, the instrumental bands or the exotica bands, the instrumental rock bands, is unlike probably many genres. For example, Bob Bogle, the former bass player of the Ventures, explained a lot of facts of life to me. When I got started with this band, I was calling around looking to see who might join us for some shows. I think state fairs, I don't know, things like that. Fleet Week in San Francisco. At that time, I think Bob, while he was still around, said that the Ventures, they don't play the United States that much anymore because they're only playing in Japan, and they're only playing in Japan because they get taken care of in Japan. Here they've got to lug around all their own equipment and make their own hotel reservations and all this stuff. And for guys that age, you just can't do that. But when they go to Japan, everybody takes care of them. All the reservations are taken care of. Their food is taken care of. Probably their onsen, their hot springs, spa is taken care of. And they just walk in and play. So for that reason, there were very few, I think, instrumental bands like that from that first generation that were still doing it, other than Dick Dale, maybe. And so, Dave was talking about Dusty Watson, Sam Boulay, who played with Dick Dale. I know that Dusty played with Dick Dale probably about 10 years, I would say. 10 or 11, 12 years, I don't know, something like that. And Dick was kind of an exception to the rule, in a way. He was an interesting guy, but say what you want about him, and he didn't really let that go to his head too much. He would still embrace the other players, the other bands, what they wanted to do, wanted to join in on shows, if it were logistically possible for Dick to do that. So there were a lot of people helping each other out in this genre. I think that Dave was trying to say, and those are just a few examples. Dusty actually wound up playing drums on our album. In fact, the Off the Radar album, the first non-bootleg album, I guess, that we ever had. So things like that. He brought me backstage, actually, Dusty did, at a Dick Dale show at Slim's here in San Francisco. And one of the roadies handed me Dick Dale's gold Stratocaster, that left-handed Stratocaster that, and I held it for probably less than half a second and gave it back because it was just, I don't want to, I can see an accident waiting to happen here. I don't want to be responsible for doing
the strings were too hot.
The strings
right?
were too hot. They were vibrating. It was getting it was like electric shock. So I snuck back out from backstage before Dick could find out I had my fingerprints all over his guitar. But certainly the Aquamarines in the beginning knew nothing we knew nothing. We knew nobody. And I think the first time we tried to do a show in San Francisco was like really, really, yeah, nobody wanted us. They're like, what, you don't sing? I mean, we do now, but I mean, it was an instrumental band at that time. And so I think the first gig that we ever got was at this really, I'm talking about a dingy, dirty hole in the wall on a Sunday afternoon for nothing. We were playing a place called the Milk Bar in San Francisco. I don't know if they're still around or not, but so somebody gave us a break, if you want to call it that. And that was with the original founding members, Stuart Brandt, who has since passed. He moved to the Midwest to be with his daughter, I believe. Mark Scardello, who moved to Colorado to be with his son, who was a rhythm guitarist, the original one at that time. And Jimmy Getz, who was the bass player at the time. He was kind of an interim bass player, even from the start. We knew that. He was more of a Beatles fan and wanted to do like a Beatles cover band, I think. But yeah, real good bass player. And he's also moved I think he's moved to Colorado, as I recall. Dave, of course, is in in Reno. I'm in San Francisco at the moment. So we've kind of spread out a little bit. But to make a long story short, it was actually a show on the radio at Stanford University, I think about a month or two later, that we did, that really propelled us forward. And I'd be happy to share more of that with you. And
Russ, that was about 2004, wasn't it?
2004, yeah. It was, I think, March or April 2004. We played at KZSU, Stanford radio station in Stanford on the university. And some things are just serendipitous in life. My wife was working with a guy named Bruce at her company, who also did a radio show at Stanford University. His name was Bruce, and Bruce said, "Yeah, come on in. Love your stuff. What I've heard so far. Come in." And before we came, he said, "Oh, by the way, I've got this recording engineer here from Greece. Her name is oh gosh, I can't remember her name. Greek name, obviously. But this girl who was just happened to be a fan of instrumental surf." And she said, she asked us, "Do you mind if I record you?" And so she set up the whole studio and mic'd everything. And the recording was just fantastic, And thank God we actually practiced before we played that, because the music, actually, the tracks actually came out really, really good. I think that night certainly we played some Low Straitjackets. I know we played Endless Summer Theme by the Sandals. I know that we played the Mermen music. I remember a song called Morpheus by the Bent Scepters, I believe. Anyway, so it came out pretty nicely, and that became our demo reel, if you will. And from there, I think within another couple of months, we were getting asked to play the state fair and sharing the stage with guys like Paul Johnson, the Duotones, the Bel Airs, and some fairly good bands that have been around for quite a while, and it earned a name. I didn't feel like we'd really earned a name at that point, but I didn't say no. So it wasn't long, I think, after that in addition to doing our day jobs and taking care of our families and everything, we were doing about 2 gigs a week on average. And that was a lot of shows, man, especially for this genre. And while I really, really still would love to go out and play live again, I certainly needed a break. And I also decided that, it was time to come up with our own material. Instead of copying all the greats that are out there. It's certainly, from the bottom of my heart, and you know, certainly the source of my inspiration. All of them, you know, from the, you know, second, third, fourth generations all the way back to, you know, guys like Martin Denny and Arthur Lyman from the 1950s exotica scene. You know, influence we decided to do later. So anyway, we're not out there ripping off those straitjackets anymore. Yes, that's the bottom line.
I
So
will say this though, if I might,
Yeah.
Ryan, 2004, 2005, the Aquamarines went through some you know, personnel changes and things like that, but it was a live band back then, and it did actually play quite a few venues, including the Hotel Utah with Battle of the Surf bands and things of that nature. And in San Francisco, the Hotel Utah was a major mecca for the bands and the fans. So I give a lot of credit. So you're looking at me and I'm saying, I'm a member of a band and I'm a fan. So I'm at all these shows seeing all the other bands, but I also play in a band. So, you know, there's no ego or anything with the members of the bands because they're also fans of the other bands, you know, and everybody goes to see the live shows. Everybody kind of supports each other. It's a hallmark of modern surf music. It's a hallmark at every local level, and it's a hallmark internationally, and even to, you know, the goodwill of somebody like Surfer Joe inviting ace bands from all over Europe and South America and North America. This is the characteristic of the scene. And it's because of the scene that I think I come into the Aquamarines. Am I right, Russ? I think
Oh
we even
no,
shared a couple of gigs together before I
absolutely.
became an Aquamarine.
No, you know, and yeah, we're very fortunate to have Dave. Certainly, I think for a variety of reasons, besides just the fact that he's a great bass player. He knew the scene. He'd been doing it a lot longer, and I'd happened to. I think we did a couple of shows, right? You were doing something with the Tone Stonies or somebody
No, the
down in
Tube Sharks, my original
Tube
band.
Sharks
The
in Santa Cruz,
the
right?
Tube Sharks played with the Aquamarines on the bill
Mm,
with the Submersions in Santa Cruz in 2004.
right,
And
right.
there's your example
There's
of
one. But
and then I
you know,
think,
I would see you everywhere.
yeah, at all the
You know,
gigs, at
you're
all
everywhere.
everybody else's
You're
gigs,
playing
right?
with some different band or something. You know, you were
But
like
that's
the bass player. Yeah.
but that's what happens. They just went to the Reverb Revival at Winter's Tavern last weekend, and who knows what bands have formed from the fan base that's sitting there in the
Mhm.
audience watching all the other bands, you know? So that happens serendipitously all the time.
Truly, you know, and thanks for sticking with me throughout all this, Dave. You know, I think, yeah, the personnel changes, it really had mostly to do with the fact that I was exhausted. You know,
Yeah,
I was
yeah,
exhausted. I was exhausted with like just booking shows and traveling and, you know,
right.
on and on and on. And because, you know, I'm not trying to pat myself on the back or anything, but I was basically the emperor of the universe and the janitor too. You know, I was like,
Right.
you know, everybody else would show up for practice and think it was like an easy thing to do, uh, and have fun. And we certainly did have fun. And the original guys, the guys that came after that, again, we're a secret society. It's very incestuous. We have members all over the world all the time. But the original guys wanted to continue to play live, and I think once they did do that, they kind of found out, you know, it's not as easy as it looks, right?
Well,
So
Mark Scardello formed the Eldorados, and he
right
went on to do
with
Agency EL 84 with Spice.
with Stewart,
Yeah, with Stewart.
right?
They
Yeah,
continued to play
and
live.
Stewart did Meshuggah Beach Party, right?
Meshuggah Beach Party and
Yeah,
Tomorrowmen, I think, right?
uh,
Before it had, yeah.
yeah, and I think, let's see, Ferentz's wife played with them too, didn't she?
Meshuggah Beach Party, sure.
Uh, sorry, it's Katie, or what was her name again?
Karen DeBonia.
Karen.
Yeah.
Sorry, Karen. I only see you every once in a while. I used to see her all the time, and not anymore. So, but yeah, I ran into Ference and Karen and a few others over at Trader Vic's in Emeryville, the original Trader Vic's, boy, what a lovely, full of atmosphere place to be playing. But Tiki-Aki Orchestra came up there, and Ference and I think Spud from Drifting Sand was hanging out there as well for that show. Gary Brandon wasn't on steel at that point. That was a different guy. But the rest of the band were there. So yeah, we show up for each other's shows. Certainly, I wouldn't take it to the point where if we didn't show up for everybody's shows that nobody would show up. But there's a lot of that going on. We like it.
You should never forget the fan base. Never forget the fans. It's more than just the members of the band showing up. It's the fans that come too. They listen to the
I was just trying. That was a poor attempt at levity.
We should let Ryan ask a few questions.
No, this is good. As a matter of fact, I have less than a minute to wrap this up. Otherwise, the Apple will shut off. But I just wanted to thank you so much for coming on the show and telling your stories. I really appreciate it, and I was very happy to. Oh, I can't see what you. Oh, I see it now. Yeah,
there it is.
Yeah, there you go. Very cool.
That is a hell of a record.
Yeah.
And we're working on another one.
Very cool.
That's a secret. That's a secret.
All right, guys.
We didn't say when.
I'll talk to you. I'll talk to you again soon.
Love what you're doing, Ryan. Thank you very much for the interest.
Thank you so much, Dave. Good to see you.